You are standing on the Eurasian steppe about 5,500 years ago, holding a rope that is definitely not strong enough. At the other end are several hundred kilograms of muscle, teeth, hooves, and concentrated panic. The horse does not know you are attempting to begin one of the most important partnerships in human history. It thinks you are a suspicious, hairless predator who has made several terrible decisions. Honestly, it has a point. A frightened horse can bite, kick, trample, or drag a person across the ground. There are easier animals to manage. Sheep do not normally launch you into the horizon. Cattle are slower. Dogs had already joined us, and, on most days, seemed reasonably pleased about it. So why did ancient humans repeatedly approach wild horses, trap them, restrain them, milk them, and eventually attempt the spectacularly unreasonable act of climbing onto their backs? The obvious answer is transportation. But that answer arrives too early. The first people who closely managed horses may have wanted meat and milk before they wanted a prehistoric motorcycle. And the clues include fat trapped inside, broken pottery, damaged teeth, ancient genomes, and a domestication story that science has already rewritten more than once. So tighten the rope. The horse has noticed us. The safest answer is probably food. Not speed, not cavalry, not a heroic prehistoric rider silhouetted against the sunset while everyone else politely invents applause. Food. Long before humans tried to travel on horses, they already knew how to hunt them. Across the grasslands of Eurasia, people had spent generations learning where herds moved, when mares gave birth, how frightened animals reacted, and which valleys or riverbanks could trap them long enough for hunters to close in. That knowledge mattered. A horse was not just an animal. It was a very large package of meat with excellent escape instincts. Catching one provided food, fat, hide, bone, sinew, and enough calories to justify a dangerous hunt. But hunting had a serious design flaw. Once the horse was dead, the horse stopped producing more horse. Keeping animals nearby changed the calculation. A living mare could provide milk repeatedly. A managed herd could reproduce. Instead of searching for wild horses every season, humans might keep a moving supply of food within reach. Assuming the supply did not panic, break the fence, kick its manager, and disappear over the horizon. This is why the distinction between hunting and domestication matters. And taming was not the same as domestication. A single horse could learn to tolerate humans during its lifetime. Domestication began when people managed whole populations, influenced reproduction, and passed those practices across generations. One calm animal was an achievement. A reproducing herd was a system. A settlement full of horse bones proves that people were extremely interested in horses. It does not prove they controlled breeding, managed living herds, or rode them. Archaeologists must separate evidence of efficient slaughter from evidence of a long-term relationship. And one of the most important places in that investigation is Botai in northern Kazakhstan. Around 5,500 years ago, the people there built settlements where horse remains dominated the archaeological record. But were they expert hunters? Or had they begun doing something far more difficult, keeping the horses alive? There was one obvious problem with keeping horses alive. Horses are extremely good at not being kept. They evolved as prey animals on open grasslands, where survival often depended on noticing danger early and leaving before the danger had fully introduced itself. Their eyes sit high and wide on the skull, giving them a broad field of view. Their hearing is sensitive. Their bodies are built for rapid acceleration, long-distance movement, and collective panic. One nervous horse can alarm the entire herd. And unlike a sheep, a frightened horse weighs several hundred kilograms and carries 4 weapons at ground level. It can bite with enough force to crush fingers. It can strike forward with its front legs. It can kick backward faster than a human can reconsider the plan. If restrained badly, it may rear, fall, drag the handler, or injure itself while attempting to escape. Adult males added another layer of difficulty. During the breeding season, stallions could become aggressive, territorial, and highly motivated to ignore prehistoric management policy. Compared with other domestic animals, horses were a terrible candidate. Sheep and goats were smaller and easier to surround. Cattle were dangerous, but slower and less capable of vanishing across the horizon in seconds. Dogs had approached human camps through scavenging and cooperation. Horses generally responded to human proximity by creating distance as quickly as possible. But every feature that made them dangerous also made them valuable. Their speed could later become transportation. Their endurance could become long-range mobility. Their strength could become traction. And their digestive system could transform grass food humans cannot use directly into meat, milk, muscle, and motion. The horse was valuable because of the same body that made it difficult to control. Humans did not need to remove its power. They needed to convince that power not to leave. The popular version of horse domestication begins with a brave prehistoric genius climbing onto a wild stallion. The horse explodes forward. The rider grips its mane. Everyone nearby watches in amazement as transportation is invented before lunch. It is a wonderful story. It is far too clean. The first problem is that most early riding equipment was made from materials that rarely survive. Rope, leather, wood, and woven fibers rot. A saddle can disappear completely, leaving archaeologists with a horse skeleton, a human skeleton, and several thousand years of missing instructions. Horse teeth sometimes show unusual wear that may have been caused by bits or other forms of restraint. But teeth can also be damaged by diet, age, natural variation, or repeated contact with materials that had nothing to do with riding. A groove on a tooth is evidence. It is not a tiny written confession saying, yes, there was a rider. Human skeletons create another problem. Researchers have proposed that repeated riding may leave a cluster of changes in the pelvis, hips, lower spine, and leg bones. Some Bronze Age individuals show patterns consistent with that kind of stress. But none of those injuries belongs exclusively to horseback riding. Heavy labor, repeated falls, carrying loads, and other physical activities can produce overlapping damage. So the earliest rider may remain archaeologically invisible. This does not mean nobody rode horses early. It means we cannot begin with the rider and force every clue to fit the picture. Large-scale horse mobility appears clearly later, when domestic horse lineages spread rapidly, and vehicles, harness equipment, and organized breeding systems become easier to identify. Before that, humans may have spent centuries learning to restrain, herd, milk, and selectively breed horses without turning every afternoon into a cavalry charge. The first great breakthrough may not have been staying on a horse. It may simply have been keeping one nearby. The most revealing evidence did not come from a saddle, a weapon, or the bones of a famous rider. It came from old fat trapped inside broken pottery. At Botai, archaeologists recovered ceramic vessels whose walls had absorbed microscopic traces of food. Thousands of years later, chemical analysis found lipid signatures interpreted as evidence for mare's milk. That mattered because milking a horse is not the same as hunting one. A hunter only needs to approach the animal once. A milker must approach the same living mare again and again. The mare had to remain accessible to people, whether near the settlement or within a managed herd. She had to tolerate close handling. Her foal also mattered because milk release in mares is closely tied to the mother-offspring relationship. Later horse milking traditions carefully manage that bond, sometimes allowing the foal to begin nursing before humans collect milk. Botai herders may have faced a similar problem, although the exact method is archaeologically invisible. This is not a casual interaction with wildlife. It requires restraint, timing, familiarity, and enough accumulated knowledge to distinguish a nervous mare from one that is about to reorganize your skeleton. The attraction was obvious. Killing a horse provided a large amount of meat once. Keeping a mare alive could provide milk repeatedly while she continued producing foals. In a landscape where food availability shifted with the seasons, that transformed the horse from a difficult prey animal into a renewable source of calories. But the pottery does not prove everything. It does not tell us whether Botai people rode their horses. It does not reveal exactly how tightly they controlled breeding, and it does not settle whether every horse around the settlement was fully domesticated. What it does show is more subtle. Humans were maintaining a relationship close enough, regular enough, and calm enough to extract food from a living horse. Somewhere between the hunt and the saddle, there was a milk pot. And that pot may mark the moment when the horse stopped being valuable only after death. For years, Botai looked like the answer. The people living there built settlements on the northern Kazakh steppe, surrounded themselves with horses, processed enormous quantities of horse remains, and may have kept some animals close enough to milk them. It seemed obvious that this was where horse domestication began. Then ancient DNA made the story much less cooperative. When researchers compared the genomes of Botai horses with those of modern domestic horses, the lineages did not match. The horses at Botai were not the main ancestors of the animals that later spread across Eurasia and eventually filled farms, roads, armies, and racetracks around the world. Instead, Botai horses belonged to a different branch, one connected to the ancestors of today's Przewalski's horses. That discovery did not make Botai unimportant. It made Botai more interesting. The people there may still have managed horses intensively. They may have milked them, restrained them, selected some individuals, and built an economy around them. But their horse population was not the lineage that eventually became dominant. In other words, the first major human experiment with horses may not have been the final successful model, and calling it a failure would be misleading. If the system fed people, supplied milk, reduced hunting risk, and lasted for generations, then it worked for the people using it. It only failed to become the version of horse domestication that later conquered the continent. This is one of the most important corrections in the entire story. Domestication was not necessarily a single moment when one brilliant person solved the horse. Different communities may have approached different horse populations for different reasons: meat, milk, or herd management. Some experiments ended, others merged, disappeared, or were replaced. The horse was not domesticated once in one clean, heroic event. Humanity kept trying, and eventually, one lineage emerged from farther west with the traits, breeding system, and social network required to spread far beyond its homeland. Imagine 2 winters. In the first, the wild herd never returns. In the second, several mares are still grazing within reach of the settlement. That difference helps explain what ancient humans may have wanted from horses before they became vehicles. Probably 3 things. First, meat. A horse could feed many people, and a managed herd offered something hunting never guaranteed: predictability. Instead of hoping a wild herd appeared at the right time, humans could keep animals within a known territory, monitor their condition, and slaughter them when food was needed most. Second, milk. This changed the economic logic. A living mare could provide food repeatedly while also producing the next generation of the herd. In seasonal environments, she became more than prey, a renewable resource with hooves. Third, wealth. A herd could move with its owners, feed itself on grass humans could not digest, reproduce, and be exchanged between families or communities. Horses could become stored value without being stored in a building. They were mobile property, although property with opinions, escape plans, and a powerful objection to poor management. Only later did another possibility become impossible to ignore. If humans were already following herds across huge distances, separating animals, recovering strays, and protecting them from predators or thieves, walking beside the herd was inefficient. Climbing onto a horse may have begun not as a grand invention, but as a practical solution to the problem of keeping up. That does not mean riding came first. It means riding may have grown naturally from herd management. The earliest horse keepers may not have imagined chariots, cavalry, empires, or long-distance trade routes. They saw food that could reproduce, milk that could move, wealth that could graze, and eventually, a source of speed waiting inside the same animal they had already risked their lives to keep alive. The horse lineage that eventually transformed Eurasia did not come from Botai. It emerged farther west, in the lower Volga-Don region of the western Eurasian steppe. Ancient DNA reveals that after about 2200 BCE, this lineage, often labeled Dom II, began spreading with extraordinary speed. Within a few centuries, it appeared across vast parts of Europe and Asia, replacing or absorbing many local horse populations. This was not simply a biological accident. For one lineage to expand so widely, humans had to do more than catch a few animals. They needed to control breeding, move horses between communities, feed them through difficult seasons, manage stallions, raise foals, and pass handling knowledge between generations. They also appear to have selected animals with traits useful under human control. Some genetic changes in later domestic horses are associated with behavior and locomotor performance, including traits that may have improved manageability and sustained movement. But there was no single domestication gene that transformed a wild horse into a cooperative employee overnight. Humans were selecting entire animals, not editing one convenient switch. A calmer horse was easier to restrain. A horse that moved efficiently and tolerated human control was more useful over long distances. An animal that reproduced reliably, survived difficult journeys, and did not attack its handler before breakfast was more valuable than one that escaped at the first opportunity. The expansion of Dom II, therefore, represents more than the spread of horses. It marks the spread of a complete human system. Breeding practices, handling techniques, social exchange, equipment, and knowledge. The horse had become a technology built from flesh, memory, and selective reproduction. Once that system existed, communities could move animals farther, trade them more widely, and multiply successful traits across enormous distances. The steppe had produced many horses before. Now it had produced a horse network. Once horses became reliable enough to manage, breed, and move, they stopped being merely useful animals. They became social power. A family with several horses possessed more than food. It possessed mobility, traction, breeding stock, and a resource that could be exchanged, inherited, gifted, stolen, or displayed. A skilled horse handler could travel farther in a day, monitor larger herds, carry messages between distant settlements, and reach hunting grounds that remained impractical for people on foot. Even before organized cavalry, that difference mattered. Speed changes relationships. A person who can travel twice as far does not simply arrive sooner. They gain access to more pasture, more trading partners, more information, and more opportunities to appear unexpectedly in places where everyone assumed they were still several days away. Horse ownership also required land, fodder, labor, and specialist knowledge. That meant not every household could maintain the same number of animals. Over time, large herds could concentrate wealth in the hands of particular families, chiefs, or warrior groups. The animal itself became a public statement. A well-fed horse demonstrated that its owner controlled resources. A trained horse showed access to knowledge. A rare or carefully bred animal could be exchanged to create alliances, settle obligations, or advertise status without anyone needing to invent a luxury watch. A horse did not need to carry a rider to transform distance. Harnessed to a vehicle, it could move people, goods, weapons, and supplies beyond what a human back could carry. By the early 2nd millennium BCE, horse-drawn chariots appeared in highly organized ritual and burial contexts across parts of the Eurasian steppe. Paired horses, cheek pieces, wheel impressions, and weapons suggest that horses had entered not only transport, but ceremony, prestige, and warfare. This did not mean every horse was a war horse. Some pulled vehicles, some produced foals, some provided milk or meat. Others became symbols powerful enough to accompany important people into graves. The horse had crossed a crucial boundary. It was no longer just something humans owned. It had become evidence of what kind of human they were. The partnership between humans and horses changed the world. But partnership is a comfortable word. Domestication also meant control. For humans, the immediate risks never disappeared. Horses kicked, bit, crushed feet, broke bones, threw riders, overturned vehicles, and dragged handlers who refused to release a rope quickly enough. Managing a herd through winter demanded constant labor. A disease outbreak, stolen animals, or a failed breeding season could destroy a family's wealth in weeks. The horse also paid a price. Humans restricted its movement, separated mares from foals, controlled reproduction, castrated males, selected bodies for labor, and trained animals to tolerate loads, harnesses, crowds, noise, and eventually battle. The more useful the horse became, the more completely human societies reorganized its life. And then that power spread outward. Mounted movement and horse-drawn transport allowed people to patrol larger territories, raid more distant settlements, move supplies faster, and concentrate force before slower communities could react. Horses did not invent warfare. Humans had managed that without assistance. They simply made violence faster. Horse ownership could also deepen inequality. A household with several animals could expand its pasture, protect more livestock, travel farther, and accumulate more wealth. A household without horses might find itself competing in a world where distance had suddenly become cheaper for everyone except them. The same animal that carried messages could carry threats. The same mobility that connected trade networks could support raiding. The same breeding knowledge that produced stronger working animals could produce larger military herds. None of this makes the human-horse relationship simple exploitation. Horses received food, protection, veterinary care, and expanded populations under domestication. But the arrangement was never equal. Humans decided which animals bred, where they moved, what they carried, and when their bodies had reached the end of their usefulness. The horse gave humanity speed. Humanity decided where that speed would go. After all the broken pottery, damaged teeth, ancient genomes, and arguments about suspicious-looking hip joints, what do we actually know? Quite a lot. Humans hunted horses long before they domesticated them. At Botai, around 5,500 years ago, people built an economy unusually dependent on horses. Lipid traces in Botai pottery have been interpreted as evidence for mare's milk, although the wider picture remains debated. An ancient DNA shows that the main lineage of modern domestic horses later expanded from the lower Volga-Don region after about 2200 BCE. Those points are relatively secure. The next layer is strongly supported, but less certain. Botai people were probably managing living horses, not merely killing wild ones. Repeated access to mares and some control over foals would have been necessary for milk production. Meat, milk, and herd security may have mattered before riding became widespread. Then we entered disputed territory. Did Botai horses wear bits? Were some early Bronze Age skeletons shaped by years in the saddle? Did occasional riding begin centuries before large-scale horse mobility? Researchers disagree because the clues are indirect, overlapping, and often incomplete, and some questions may never be answered. We do not know who first climbed onto a horse. We do not know whether that person was trying to herd animals, escape danger, impress someone, or simply survive a decision that became worse immediately after it began. We do not know how many failed attempts came first. The honest answer is not that humans domesticated horses for one reason. They kept returning because each success revealed another reward. Food became husbandry. Husbandry became mobility. Mobility became power. The risk remained. But the value of controlling the horse kept growing faster than the fear of approaching it. Return to the step. The rope is still in your hand. The horse is still watching you. Muscles tense, ready to flee or kick your ribs into a more educational arrangement. But now, the scene looks different. You are not necessarily trying to invent cavalry. You may be trying to keep a mare accessible enough to milk, to prevent an entire herd from disappearing over the horizon, to preserve food through winter, to protect animals that can reproduce instead of beginning every season with another dangerous hunt. The first step was small. Keep the horse alive. Then keep it nearby. Then manage the herd. Then choose which animals reproduced. Then use them to carry, pull, travel, trade, communicate, raid, and rule. No single person planned the full sequence. No one standing beside the first restrained mare could have imagined chariots, mounted messengers, cavalry empires, farm horses, racing tracks, or roads measured by how far an animal could travel in a day. The original rope probably was not strong enough. What held the horse was something more powerful. Generations of observation, failed attempts, broken bones, patient handling, selective breeding, and knowledge passed from one frightened human to the next. Ancient humans did not tame horses because they were fearless. They did it because the reward kept becoming larger than the fear. One nervous animal, one inadequate rope, and eventually, an entire world moving faster than human feet were ever meant to carry it.